Okay. Okay, welcome everybody. We're just going to wait a few more minutes, let a few people find their way to this room, which is a little hidden, and then we'll get going. There's a sign-in sheet that's going around, so please do be sure to sign in and put your information on there. Hi, there's several seats up here in the front. Okay. Okay. Why don't we just go ahead and get started right on time, because it's a lot to cover in the 2-hour workshop. Welcome everybody to the first of a 4-part series, a workshop series on grant writing here at San Jose State. This is the 3rd year that we've run this series, and we're delighted to have it continue. The series is a collaboration between the Office of Research and our auxiliary partners on campus, the Research Foundation and the Tower Foundation at University Advancement, and we're partnering together to create the series and offer it to faculty here at San Jose State. My name is Amy D'Andrade. I'm a professor in the School of Social Work. I serve as the Associate Dean for Research in the College of Applied Sciences and Arts, and I'm director of the University Grants Academy this year, again, for this is our 3rd year running it. And part of that University Grants Academy is this fall grant writing series, and I'll explain a little bit about how they're associated. Here's the agenda for what we're going to cover today. We're going to do some introductions. We're going to talk about the purpose of the proposal summary. That's the topic of this particular workshop, how to develop and why to develop a proposal summary. We're going to talk about what should go into one of them and provide you some tools and examples. Then we have some time for you to actually work on developing one yourselves here this afternoon, and then tell you about some next steps. But before we get into the introductions and the workshop content, I want to talk just briefly about how this workshop and the series relates to the Spring University Grants Academy experience. So the University Grants Academy, if you haven't heard about it, is a intensive semester-long experience in the spring. It provides 0.2 assigned time for faculty members to devote that time to developing an external grant proposal of a significant size for their discipline. And that's going to vary depending on your college and your department and what opportunities available to you are. It provides for a program in the spring that supports you with resources and mentors through the process of writing an external grant. It provides for you to obtain expert critical feedback on your proposal from an external senior scholar in your field that you identify, and then we reach out to them and ask them to provide a review for compensation. It provides for an incentive of $500 in research funds for you to use on your research expenses if you submit that external proposal by the first opportunity after the end of the UGA. So if the submission window is in October and you finish the UGA in May, as long as you submit at the first submission window, you get the $500 research funds submission incentive. And in addition, this year, every year we tweak it a little bit based on the feedback that we get from the prior year. And this year we're incorporating a coaching element so that in either individually or in very small groups, you will get a coach that will take you through the process over the semester and through the submission point of getting that proposal done and out the door. So the application for that is due in early November, and we purposely made it fairly late so that you could take advantage of this workshop series to develop the most competitive application to that experience if you want it. So the application is a little bit more substantial this year than in prior years. It includes a budget and a budget justification for your proposed project, as well as about 6 pages of the narrative for your proposal. In order to write those elements, you can take advantage of these workshops after each one of which you will have a piece that you could actually just move forward into that UGA application. So this is the series. We have flyers up here that we'll hand out afterwards if you don't have one already. You would want to attend each of these workshops, use the workshop time to develop that component, which would then feed into your UGA application. Does that make sense? Understand? Okay. We just want to give you the help that you need. Even if you're not interested in the UGA, or because it is a competitive process, if you don't end up being admitted into the UGA, these workshops are still, will be useful to you in crafting a proposal. You're going to meet all the people that you need to know to submit it, and all the resources that are available on campus to help you develop the most competitive proposal possible.
Can I just add one?
Yes, please do.
I will just add one point in the case. Everything is on our website, on the Office of Research. So if you go under the funding opportunity, you will get all the information about the UGA. And if you go under the funding support, you have all the information about the workshop series, just to mention it.
Okay, so before we go any further, I want to introduce everybody who's here to provide the content to you. So we'll start with Dr. Gilles.
So welcome to everyone today for this first session of our grant writing workshop. So my name is Gilles Muller. I'm the Associate Dean of Research in the Office of Research.
Hi everyone, my name is Raj Prasad. I'm the Director of the Office of Sponsored Programs at the Research Foundation, and currently I'm also the Interim Executive Director for the Research Foundation.
I'm the Information Services Coordinator. And on campus here, we have two foundations, the Research Foundation and the Tower Foundation. We'll talk more about the differences between the two. I'm Michelle Smith, Corporate Foundation Relations Officer of the Tower Foundation, part of the University of Maryland.
Okay, thank you. And I'm Amy Tendrai. I already introduced myself. Okay. So we've asked Raj to talk about the notion of a grant proposal life cycle.
Thank you, Amy. So the grant proposal life cycle is the full cycle. We call it the cradle to grave concept, where it begins with you as the faculty member, the PI, generating your idea in terms of what you'd like to test out, your hypothesis, and how you kind of want to conduct your research. Once you've done that, you want to find a sponsor to fund your work, depending on what sort of sponsor you want to target. If it's public funding, you'd be working with the Research Foundation, and if it's non-public funding, you'd be working with our colleagues at Tower Foundation to kind of work through, proposals that are open and that they're taking requests for proposals that you can submit to. Depending on, again, on the particular foundation, step 3, we would work with you to help you put together the proposal. We ensure, we've met all the requirements stipulated in the RFPs. We're ensuring all compliance with university and the particular research and the particular foundation guidelines to ensure we have a full packet that can be submitted to the sponsor on your behalf and the university's behalf. Because keep in mind, the proposal is submitted by the sponsored programs administrator. Depending on the type of funding, it would be either the Research Foundation and or the Tower Foundation. So the hard work is done at this point. Now we're kind of waiting to see if the sponsor is willing to fund your work. Once we get that green light, both of the foundations would get into the award negotiation to ensure that you have, you can disseminate the information. We've addressed confidentiality, right to publish, termination clause, all that good stuff. So that we've taken care of that. If there's any IP, we've addressed all those issues. Once all of that is done, the foundation will then set up the accounts, and it will transfer to a post-award manager that will work with you to set up the account. We'll introduce you to human resources if you need to hire staff, if you need to purchase some big ticket items, computers, supplies. It may be to get purchase orders going, procurement cards, P cards that you may need to kind of get your project going. So that's when all the fun is happening. And then step 6 is managing that project, is again, working with you on a monthly basis to make sure you're on target financially. The approved budget for 12 months may be, X number of dollars, meeting with you to make sure you're on target. And if that's not the case, we want to plan ahead of time to ensure if we need to ask for a no-cost extension that we're doing that. Or if not, we're getting ready to close it out. So at that point, the post-award staff are working with you to say, we've got this report due at 30 days after, or 60 days after, or 90 days after, to ensure we meet all the closeout requirements. And that's pretty much your the cycle. And we also take care of any of the audit requirements. You may get site visits. You may get, on the Research Foundation, if we spend more than $750,000 in federal funds, we go through what's called a single audit for compliance and a financial audit. So we'd be kind of representing you if your project is selected to be audited. Thank you.
Thanks, Raj. I just want to point out something that if anybody's really quick, they might have noticed already, which is that in our workshop series, we actually aren't going in exactly this order. Our workshop series, we have this first one, which is getting your ideas down and creating a document that you can use to communicate with others about your idea. And then we have doing the budget. And then we have the narrative. And lastly, we have finding funding. And you can see in this life cycle, we have finding funding coming before developing your proposal, which makes good sense. But in order to align it well with the application process for the UGA, we're doing the budget first and the narrative first. And then you can do a more extensive search for funding within the UGA if you need to do that, because we sort of review these elements in that spring semester. Okay, so the purpose of the summary. Has anybody ever done something like a proposal summary before? No, a little bit? It has a lot of benefits. It may feel like sort of just an unnecessary exercise, but in fact, it's not at all. It's a document that you will use over and over again as you move through the proposal development process. One of the main things you can do if you're in the early stages of thinking about what you want to fund, what your idea is, this is your first step. You have to take it from the ideas in the air into something that's down on paper that you can work with. So maybe that's where some of you are, haven't actually gotten your idea down. Another important use of the proposal summary is as a tool to communicate with others. And the others that you may want to communicate with include the people you're going to want to collaborate with. It's almost never the case that anybody does a research project in total isolation. You need a sample, or you need a statistician, or you need a community agency, or you need whatever. You need to work with others. And so as you're reaching out to them, hi, welcome, there's a sign-in sheet, there's some chairs here, there's a seat available over here. You need something to use as a way to communicate with them and invite them to participate with you in your project. And if you have something written down, a 1-page or a 2-page distillation of your idea that conveys its essential elements and provides your contact information, then you have something you can use that's very effective in terms of communicating with potential collaborators. Any other comments about that?
I would say when oftentimes we have faculty members who have an idea and they'll contact someone at the Power Foundation and say, I'm having difficulty finding a funder and I wanted to come talk to your team about it. And the very first thing we will always say is, can you please send us a summary? And that's what this will serve, is making sure that we have the types of questions that we're going to ask you anyway, but we can be thinking about it ahead of time and make better use of your time when you come to speak with us.
All right, so Michelle segued us nicely into that second bullet point, funding searches. Of course, you can do your own funding search, and we encourage you and teach you the tools to do that in our workshop on finding funding. But Carmina, maybe you can talk a little bit about what you at the Research Foundation can do if you have something like a proposal summary to work with. Can you help? What do you do to help faculty find funding?
So the first step when we have faculty contact us is to, as Michelle mentioned, provide a custom proposal summary. Very brief, it doesn't have to be totally detailed, because we also have a keeper list, which is pretty extensive, and we ask about 10 or 12 that we think is a good idea. And then Brenda and I, we do our search. We also submit a custom search to two grant tools, which is SPIN and GRC. And both tools will help, in addition to our search, provide both private and public. We also have funding on email, which you would have to subscribe to, and that form is on our website. We also provide support for the database for SPIN and GRC. So we are the administrators for SPIN. So Brenda and I would validate profiles as they're submitted. And we also have the login for GRC if you have any students.
And you'll learn a lot more about those tools in the workshop on finding funding, but for that office's services as it relates to this idea, the proposal summary, they use that to do a search on your behalf. So that's another use. A third communication use of a proposal summary is when you have an idea of a potential funder, like maybe you think your idea is appropriate for something that the NIH would want to fund, or NSF, or a particular foundation. You can reach out to the program officers at that funding entity and say, I have this idea. Does this look like a good fit? Do you want to, Gilles or Raj, do you want to expand on that a little bit?
So yeah, so that's a point that's very important when you may have identified a funding opportunity that you want to apply to. One of the first steps that you should do, well, you have your idea, is to contact the program officer to make sure that what you propose will be within what they are looking to fund. You don't want to spend months working on a proposal and then you send it in and it will be rejected because it doesn't fit what the funder is looking for. So it's always encouraged to contact the program officer. And usually when you do that the first time, because the person does not know you, you send a request to have a phone conversation, but at the same time, you will send a one or maximum 2 pages of your summary of ideas so they can have an idea. And then either they will tell you, yes, you can submit a proposal and you have discussions, or sometimes if they think it's not a good fit, but they may be aware of other programs in the same agency and they can refer you to a different program that they have. So that's very important. And that's why always make sure that when you do that, you have a summary of what you propose to do and why it is relevant for this fund. And one thing, and I will let Michelle mention it, because depending what type of funder or sponsor you are looking, the one that I just mentioned where you contact directly the program officer, typically it's for federal agencies like NIH, NSF, those. But when you are talking about non-profit organization, Michelle will tell you or it's done.
With private funders, foundations, and private funding from corporations, philanthropic funding, it's a little bit different. And the reason is because the public funders, for the most part, they're funding you and your work. The private funders look at any application as they're funding the university. And so if someone else within the university is already in the middle of a grant or is seeking funding, or perhaps Mary Papazian's office is in high-level talks with that funder, for you to just call directly both confuses the funder because they think, well, what's going on over there, or it may preempt a much larger university-wide funding opportunity that's in the works. So while it's advisable to contact the program officer for public funding, we always ask that if you're looking for private funding, that you contact our foundation first, because then we can check and make sure that this isn't going to disrupt anything. And 9 times out of 10, we can say, great, I'm so excited you're looking at that, and here's our plan for engaging them. I'm meeting with that program officer as it happens, next week, and we can have something ready for them. But we ask you not to do that on your own without checking. That makes sense that it's the difference there is.
I was just going to say, one thing that people are often not aware of is that we have 2 different auxiliaries serving 2 different kinds of funders. And so you use different strategies depending on which one. For public funds, government funds, NIH, NSF, DOD, state, county,
Yeah.
all those folks, it's the Research Foundation. Corporations, foundations, almost all the time, Tower Foundation.
If it's something that has the word foundation in it, usually, a few exceptions, but if it has the word foundation in it, or fund, or trust, or any family name, or a company name, it's usually the Tower Foundation. And if you get confused and you're not sure, it's fine to contact anyone at the front of the room, and they'll point you in the right direction to make sure that you can find that out quickly.
And to add about that, one way to make sure that you get your answer, you can think about the Office of Research as a liaison. So if you have a questions related to anything related to your research, by research, meaning researchership and creative activity, you can contact us in the Office of Research. Either we have the information and we will work with you, or we will help you to find the right person. For instance, about knowing if you look at your funder, if it's a federal or non-profit organization, you're not sure, please contact us and we will let you know, because we work directly with both foundations, the Research Foundation and the Tower Foundation, and then we put you in contact with the right person. So don't hesitate, because it will also save you a lot of time.
And just a little additional comment about reaching out to program officers, which often is a little, people have some trepidation about doing that. But, you know, you can read the guidelines as carefully as you can and feel like, yes, what I'm doing is a good fit. But there's all kinds of, you know, priorities or trends or preferences of the top administrator that you're not going to be privy to and you're not going to know, but the program officer will. So even though you think your idea looks like a really good fit for this particular RFP, it really makes sense to reach out and contact the program officer, because they're going to have some inside information that may be useful.
And the other point about that, it's not also to just check if it's a good fit, but you also want to establish a connection with the program officer. Because we will talk about that later at some point, but the program officer has an important role often in the final decision about funding or not. So that's the reason why, depending on what happens with the review, talking to the program officer can help to make a decision in one way or the other. So that's the reason why it's always good to start this relationship as soon as possible.
And then the last communication use of the proposal summary is to facilitate any internal communication requirements. And there are two that come to my mind. One is, if you're working on a significant project, you want your chair and your dean to be aware that you're moving through this process and you're going to be submitting. And this tool can be very useful for that. You don't want to wait until the last minute. And the last thing, one of the last things you do when you submit your proposal is you route it, basically it's called. And that's where it runs around, the proposal runs around the university getting signatures from everybody that has to approve it, starting with you, your chair, your dean, and then on up through the Office of Research, the Research Foundation, like 8 signatures on the simplest proposal. So if you wait to do that till the last minute, and your chair's like, what are you talking about? I can't release you for the spring, or your dean doesn't want you to have overload, or whatever it is, but you haven't talked about this with them, it can really trip up your submission process. So you want to be communicating with them early about what you're thinking, and this proposal summary is a good tool to do that. Make sense? Okay, the last internal requirement is, I'll let Gilles talk about it. It's called a limited submission, right? Yeah.
So some funding opportunities have restrictions. So for instance, the sponsor or the funder decides that the campus can only submit one or a limited number of applications. So for that, what happens is that often we have a call going out to the campus explaining that if you are interested in this funding opportunity, you need to respond to us and to provide some information, because there will be an internal review of your application. And let's say if there is only one application that can go out from San Jose State. The internal review committee will decide which one. So in this case, you will have to address specific points, and in general, the points that you need to address are based on what you have in your summary. So your 1 or 2 page summary will help you, because you need to address why is it relevant to the funder, or do you have the expertise to conduct the proposed risk activities that you have in your proposal. So that's the other reason that it's important also to have in mind this idea, because this happens before you know if you will be selected to write the full proposal, for instance. And often it takes a short period that you have to do that. And that's another important point to consider your summary.
Yep.
Yes, please.
So with all of this, and I know we've talked about it, the key is communicate early. And when in doubt, ask the question. So with respect to internal requirements and budget development, as Amy has said, talk to your chair and dean, talk to your colleagues. You know, if you're thinking about purchasing an equipment, you probably need to consult FDNO, you know, in terms of wiring, where is this going to go? Are you thinking about cost share? The sooner you start discussing all of this, it's going to be a much simplified and less stressful process. And even when you're putting together budgets, you know, kind of vet that with colleagues. And does this make sense? If I'm proposing a 20% effort or 50% effort, is that reasonable? If I'm trying to, you know, put in for equipment, you're going to have to demonstrate that 100% of that time that equipment will be used for that project. If it looks like only half of the time will be used for that project, why would you ask for the full cost of the equipment on that one proposal? Shouldn't it be split in other things? So this is considerations that, you know, I would vet with colleagues, with your chair and dean, with the Office of Research, or with any one of the foundations to kind of put that full package together. And the sooner you start, the better. It's a much easier process. And I would say sooner means 30 days plus.
Yeah, and even on a simpler level, the proposal summary is useful for budget development. So our next workshop is on drafting the budget. If you come into that workshop and you haven't done a proposal summary, you're going to have difficulty drafting a budget because you won't have put enough thought into what it is you want to do to be able to think about, what do I need to fund? How much time do I need? How many microscopes do I need? Whatever it is, right? Mm-hmm. So this is a nice first step to prepare you for the next step of developing your budget. And finally, then we're done with selling the purposes of the proposal summary, is that for many funders, like the university wants an initial letter of intent from faculty who are interested in a limited submission proposal, many funders don't want you and them to go to a lot of trouble spending months and months investing in a proposal that's not a good fit for them. And so what they ask for is for you to draft a letter of intent that distills your idea succinctly, that they can evaluate, and they gather a lot of those, and then they pick, you know, the 20 or the 10 that are most likely going to be projects that they're going to want to fund. And then they reach out and say, we accepted your letter of intent, we think it's a good fit, now write us a proposal, now invest the months and months of time and energy, now that you know it's got a reasonable chance of being competitive. Do you want to say a little bit more?
Yeah, I'll give one more reason. We weren't finished selling the importance of the letter of intent, is that particularly with some of the national foundations that fund in all regions, they get a lot of applications. An example I can give you is a funder that reports each year on what they had the previous year. And recently I had one that said, we received approximately 1,000 letters of intent, and we invited 50 to submit a full proposal. And then out of those, they funded half of those. So the competition starts really early to even make it into that first batch. I mean, that's sort of an extreme example, because more often it's a slightly smaller number, but a lot of the national foundations do have a huge number of applications at the letter of intent or the LOI stage. And so to spend the time initially and really think that through, as opposed to like, oh, I've got an idea, let me throw it together, you're probably not going to make it past the first stage. So really give it the thought at the beginning. and you'll be more competitive at that stage to then make it the next step in the process.
One other comment about terminology. You hear this phrase letter of intent across a number of kinds of documents from different entities. So for example, San Jose State asks for, is that what they call the limited submission? Letter of intent from you for the limited submission process. It's very brief, right? What does it consist of?
It's you have to answer 3 or 4 questions. One, basically what you propose to do. How does it fit with the funder? Then you need to provide both your CV, the expertise, and the funding that you are looking for.
It's like a paragraph.
Yeah,
right?
it's a 1 page more or less. So it's a few paragraphs.
The NIH has a letter of intent that's optional often, right? Where they just want to know, they want to have a sense out there in the US who might be interested in this and how many people might be interested in it. And in that case, it's really brief, right? It's not even content. It's mostly just a note, I'm thinking of applying, right? But that's called a letter of intent. And at the other end is what Michelle's talking about, where it's like, could be 3 to 5 pages,
It
right?
could be, and it's just a squished version, compact version of what you're going to be expanding in the full proposal. And sometimes it's called a letter of intent, sometimes it's a letter of interest, and sometimes it's a letter of inquiry. There's always an I at the end, but there's something, some kind of LOI, but they use those terms interchangeably. Yeah.
Or some of the federal ones will have what's called a white paper. So DOD is an example, just to kind of flush out the idea, and you're not detailing the budget, but you're kind of letting them know as a overall figure, I'm looking for $500,000 as an example. But then if you've committed to $500,000 and they invite you to submit a full proposal, you're stuck with the $500,000.
So I just wanted you to be aware that that phrase is used to cover a lot of different kinds of these preliminary documents. They can all look different depending on the entity.
So you have to come up with your idea first and then look for a funding source. That's I guess, the way you're recommending going about it? Or is it maybe better to, I don't know, like scan the field and see what's out there and then try and tailor your idea to?
I'll give you a reaction and then I'd be interested in hearing from our, I think it's a really good question. It's sort of like the chicken or the egg. But the reality is that a funder is unlikely to want to invest in you unless you can demonstrate that you have some expertise in that area. And so if you're just totally open and you look across, first of all, there's just too much stuff out there. You have to narrow your scope somewhat or you're just going to be overwhelmed. And it needs to be an area in which you've developed expertise. Otherwise, why would they want to give you 50, 100, $500,000, right?
Yeah, I agree with that.
I've been in doing grants in the South Bay here for about coming up on 20 years. And prior to coming to the university, I worked with different agencies, different nonprofit organizations that did direct service. And it's a slightly different concept here at the university because you're obviously going to just look for opportunities in your research area. But in the private organization sector, it's called chasing the money. And so if you're just chasing the money, it's not necessarily going to meet your needs if you're doing direct services. And it's not that much different in terms of the university if you're you want to reach your research goals or your program interest goals or perhaps what you envision for your students. So chasing the money poses some difficult issues if you're like, oh, I guess I'll change what I really want to do. We usually recommend sticking to what your focus is. There may be some slight tweaking, find to tweak words, but to completely change your concept to meet the funder doesn't necessarily meet your goals.
And I will add, so one thing that you could do based on that, if you are looking at different opportunities where there is funding, make sure you can find something interesting. But the first thing you would do in this case, if you have a kind of expertise in the area, is to develop some preliminary results. And this you can use, for instance, internal support from the university or the college, at least that you can demonstrate that you can do something in this area. So that could be a way, if you really want to start something new, but you still need to have some expertise. The other aspect, to go back to what Michelle said, often, and you will see at some point, you have your expertise, you know in which area you want to work, but sometimes it's not a good match or a complete match with funding opportunities. So this is where now you will do the opposite, is that you are working in that area, they are funding something here. Can I switch a little what I'm doing? It's still within my area, but I will address the mission of the funder so I can apply to that. So this is something that more and more people have to do, because we know that the funding doesn't come all the time. So you also need to be flexible, not to say, oh, I will wait just for the right funding opportunity, because it may never happen. And that's the reason why you also need to be flexible at that level. Did you answer your question?
Okay.
Do we have any database that funding, around the Bay Area, the local funding?
So I think part of, so the funding databases, there isn't one that's just a locally based one, there are national ones. So the two that were mentioned earlier, you mentioned.
There's two, SIN and the Grants Resource Center. There's also grants.gov commonly used, which covers both public and private. So it covers a huge, a lot of agencies that you could filter through.
There's also Pivot if you go to the library and you want to use that system.
And that does allow, I'm pretty sure, you to filter by
Yeah.
geographic area.
And there's another tool that our foundation we have used in the past, and it's more designed for the private funding. Unfortunately, the university has not too long ago discontinued subscription to that, but we do have two subscriptions that are not university-wide, but our staff is able to do searches for you. So that's oftentimes why we have people come to the Power Foundation to talk about it, because the only way to access that is for us to work on the search until perhaps in a future time that database will be available to the campus again.
Okay, so we better move on. So what goes into a proposal summary? Basically, all the elements that will go into your full proposal, but greatly distilled into just their most essential elements. So what you need to talk about is the relevance or significance of the project and its fit with the funder priorities. The problem that you're going to study, the aims of your project, how you're going to go about conducting the study or what the methods are, the resources that you have in terms of your expertise and capabilities and the capabilities that are available to you here on campus. You want to be able to show you have the capacity to undertake the work you're proposing to do. You want to show how you're going to know whether or not you've succeeded. Often dissemination is also part of what you talk about in this area. And then you want to at least have a sense of the amount that you're talking about. Is this a $50,000 project? Is it a $500,000 project? What's the budget? So what we want to do now is talk about some of the tools we have available to help you craft your first draft of this. And we have, well, first let me stop. I should have stopped and seen if any of our experts up here want to add anything to this or flesh this out at all.
Yes?
Sure, we can make it available. We're hoping that this is recording well and that we can make the recording available as well.
So for that, make sure that you sign in on the sign-in sheet that is going around, because we have your information and we can email you everything.
Okay, so now all of you are in different departments, you're looking at different funding sources, and you may also be in really different places in terms of where you are in your thinking about your project. If you've been thinking about this for a while and have thought it through a lot, you may be ready in a different way than somebody who's just in the most beginning points where you have an inkling of an idea, but you haven't really put anything down on paper yet. So we have a different set of tools depending on where you are. For those of you in the early stage, how many of you would consider yourselves in the early stages? You have an inkling, but you haven't really developed it very far. Okay, most people. So we have two different kinds of forms for you because there's often two different kinds of thinkers. There's nonlinear thinkers, and then we have a tool that looks sort of like this, like a mind mapping thing, where you just need to get your ideas out there, all the different aspects. Obviously, you don't have to use our tool, which will constrain you a little bit. You can make your own circles on a piece of paper, but just a way to get the ideas out, start figuring out how they're connected to each other. And then there's a related tool. Once you've done that, getting it all out, that's not something you can really send to a funder, right? They're not going to want a mind map. They're going to want it in a particular order, and oftentimes they'll even have a template for their letters of inquiry. So you need to take that creative thinking and put it into a linear form. And so there's a second tool that allows you to do that. So those of you who signed up in advance, we sent you these tools in Microsoft Word form, but we also do have hard copies here if you want to just use them. So those are that's the nonlinear early stage tool. For those of you who are linear thinkers, we have a really nice tool that just asks you questions. And all you have to do is answer the questions, and your answers will form the basis of the content of the proposal summary. So you won't be able to see it from there, but in one sentence, describe your project. What will you do, where, with whom, and why? That's the first box. Second box, how does the project fit your department, school, or college's priorities or strategic plans? So you just go through and answer the questions. I really like it because that's all you have to do. And then, of course, you would take this and turn it into whatever format your funder might want.
Can I mention a couple of other things?
Yeah, oh yeah, I was asking.
All of these tools, especially this one, also does a couple of other things for you as you're thinking through, because when you're finished, it's giving you some of the keywords that you're either going to use to sign up for potential funders or that you're going to come to the Tower Foundation with. Even if the funder doesn't end up wanting to know specifically how it fits with your college's current priorities, you're going to need that anyway when you make your case to have support internally on campus. So a lot of these questions on this or even the previous ones, you're going to be answering questions which may or may not end up on your final letter of inquiry, but are going to be necessary for you to move it forward through the proposal stage. So even if you're like, I don't need that one, think about it because you will. And this may be the time to think about it. And the other piece, I know where it is on the previous page, but the budget part, can you go back one screen? So the cost, you're not going to be at the budget point yet. So this is what your grand scheme is of what you really want to do. And then when you work with the Research Foundation or the Tower Foundation, what we may do is go, this is great, and no funder funds that much. So we will help you split it up perhaps. Like, oh, wow, yeah, on the first time out, who's going to give you $200,000 to do something, or $500,000, which is really what it might be. So do what you really want to do, and then oftentimes we'll be able to help you say, let's break it up into 3 smaller chunks that might help you. But whatever one of these tools you use, have everything in there is a good starting place, because then we can parse things out with you. Okay. So, can I just add?
Do you want to introduce yourself?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm Brenda Swan. I am and you've already met. I mean, affiliate with a member of our team. But to Michelle's point about how to use some of the information that you can see looking through the concept and the keyword searches. If you come to us and you are looking for support in locating a funder, we
Thank you. Okay, so if you're a little farther along, we have some later stage tools, we call them. If you've even got to the point where you think you know who your funder is, we have very simple templates for NIH and NSF, where it makes sense if you're reaching out to a particular funder that you frame your thoughts with them using language that they're comfortable and familiar with. So their terminology, their words. You fit all these same ideas, these components, but under their framework, right? So NIH, they want to know about specific aims, so you need to use that language. And the bullet points here will help you walk through and put the related content. But basically, it's the same content, you just organize it. Makes sense to organize it on their behalf using the words that make sense to them that they're familiar with. Similarly with NSF, they want to know about intellectual merit and broader impact. And you can talk about all the essential elements of your project under those rubrics. If you are not interested in NIH or NSF, but maybe a private foundation, we also have another template that you could use to draft a letter of intent for a private foundation, or even just for whatever funder. If you're not sure of the funder, but you've got a lot of thinking down, you can use this tool to just get it all down on paper. This essentially concludes the information part of this 2-hour workshop. And we'll take a little break, and then second hour is the workshop. The recording will be turned off, totally voluntary to stay, but I want to take a few minutes to make the case and encourage you very strongly to stay. I know there's always, if you're anything like me, it's not something you want to do. You don't want to put the thoughts down right now, surrounded by other people. Maybe you're hungry, it's distracting. You want to go into your office, you want to go home, you want to have lots of white space around you to do that deep thinking. But here's a couple of arguments for why you should stay. One, that kind of time is super hard to find. And you and we have found this time together. We have created this space in your weekly schedule, and it exists for another hour, and you might as well use it. Because if you go back to your office, you're going to get into email, a student's going to come by, whatever it is. But here it is. There's this hour. You might as well use it to get a crappy first draft down, which you can then revise and make better. Second argument, help is at hand. You're in this room with experts whose entire jobs, not mine, but these folks' entire jobs is about helping you write the most competitive proposal possible. So here they are, and you can raise your hand and ask them any questions about phrasing or terminology or where something goes or whatever it is, and they have the knowledge that can help you. Third thing is that if you do this, you will leave after this hour with a concrete product. That's your first step in actually writing a grant proposal. And that's huge if you haven't done it yet. So I really, really encourage you to stay. It's a little tight in here, and there's not a lot of desk space. It's true for those of you who are sitting in those chairs, but if you even want to go away into the other parts of Clark Hall, there's a computer space out there. There's probably some desk space that you can spread out. We have the hard copy for all of the tools here, and just encourage you to do that. Yeah. Okay, good. Thank you. Let's do that right now. Any questions about what to do next or anything that we covered? Can you ask your question a little bit louder? I didn't quite hear.
So,
There are three.
so in fact, it depends on which funder. So the easiest way to answer this question, contact us at the Office of Research. let us know what you are thinking, which funder, and we will let you know after which point of contact you need to work with, either if it's on the research foundation side or the product foundation. That's what I would suggest if you are not sure. Yeah, I have some, I can give it to you. But yeah, so that's, and otherwise, as I said earlier, we are not sure, just think about the office of research. We are here to help you as a liaison, so that's why it's either, and then you work directly with the research foundation and the product foundation, and you will be in contact with the right people to work with. So this is just to help you.
Can you give a sense of what the private foundations have been willing to fund research in universities like SJSU, and what are the topics and areas that typically use?
Well, I'm going to give you a short answer because it's a complicated answer. And we'll be talking more about that during the workshop focused on that. But whereas the Department of Education funds education, and we know from some of the federal sources what they fund, foundations fund everything. They can change their mind from year to year because foundations are private entities and their board can say, I have a relative who's having difficulty with X, let's fund that this year. So they can change their mind at any point. So if there's something that someone's doing research on or is interested in doing a program, someone out there funds it. And there are thousands and thousands of foundations and corporations that have funding components that are not sponsorships, but they're philanthropic funding. So there isn't any here are the trends. It's really, there are a couple of trends. Like right now, some funders that have been funding STEM are now interested in STEAM a little bit. So there's some of those kinds of trends, but usually it's important to look at what your field is, who's funding that right now, and within that, who's funding what might fit with you. So I don't have a specific answer because it is so broad. And that's always the challenge with private funding is that 1 year a funder can be interested in something and is funding some of the state faculty members, and the next year they completely change their mind and may not come back to that for a couple of years.
So from the public funding sector, what I can say is for the fiscal year that ended on June 30th, we received $48 million in federal funding. 70% of that is federal. So it's NIH, NSF, we have DOD, Department of Education. And what we've seen in terms of trends is approximately 20% of our proposals are funded, which is a much higher rate than traditionally that you would see. And you would ask the question, why is that? It's because most of the faculty have connections with the sponsors. So there's already a pre-existing relationship. So they've established a track record. So it's easier to get funding that way. But we've also have faculty that kind of determined that if, as an example, if they're applying for NIH, and if it's just, idea gathering, it's exploratory, they're thinking about an R03 mechanism or an R21 to do a pilot study. And then once they have that, then they're looking at some of the bigger mechanisms to get more funding. So those are tools we can kind of walk you through to kind of give you specifics, but those, at least we believe, would increase your chances of funding.
What's interesting, and you mentioned this, a lot of the federal funding, they're larger grants. Foundations, for the most part, are not going to be nearly as big. And in this past year, I would say that more than half of all the faculty members that I worked with were new to the grant application process. So there are a couple of challenges. It's the first time out of the gate, so the return rate, the success rate may be slightly lower, but it's going to have to happen. You have to do it the first step, no matter what. At some point, that has to happen. So the majority of the money does, so the dollar amounts tend to be with Research Foundation, and the smaller grants tend to be with Power Foundation, not exclusively, but oftentimes there are lots of smaller ones. It's sort of an interesting, where do you start? Do you start with a $50,000? You go straight for the big money, and sometimes that makes sense. So definitely consider all types of funding sources. I've had people say, well, I'm in the sciences, so of course I'm going to go with the federal funding. Oftentimes that is the answer, but not always for different projects. So be sure to consider all of the opportunities that you have because you may find the right fit. It may not be your full project, and that's why I mentioned with the budget. What you need might be really big, but a first step might be a smaller grant that you go for, because the best time to get funding is when you have funding. Most of the time, funders are like, oh, who else is funding you? So you've got to get that first award in order to be successful down the road.
Okay, I want to just give you one other benefit from your participation today, and that is if you do, in fact, complete a proposal summary and you would like to get critical feedback on it, which is smart. It's never fun, but it's very smart to do that. You can send it to Dr. Gilles Mueller, and he will either provide that feedback for you or find somebody on campus who can give you the most knowledgeable feedback and arrange to have that done. So that's a nice benefit, and I encourage you to take advantage of that as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and stop for now. It's, I think, exactly about 1. You can take a break if you like, but then come back and we'll work until 1:45, and then just have a little consult before we let you go.
And I do have some business cards here in the front.
Oh, and if you need a tool, we have the tools if you want to come up and get those. We also have flyers for the remaining workshops and information about the University Grants Academy. There's an information session on the 25th, so if you want that.
Yeah, it's just enough.
Sure. Where are the nearest restaurant is here?
I think there's one right across the hall. Yeah.
I don't know.
You're a faculty member? How does it work for you guys?
Right? It's kind of in that gray area.
Yeah.
So, because I am, but I'm also a volunteer, so really kind of like you were asking for what reason. So what I love all this. I've got a master's in engineering management. I've got a lot of great ideas too.
Well,
I've got the experience with doing pieces work. I don't want to jump in all that. At the end of the day, you can't
So-
apply for grants.
Sure, so we've got examples where if your chair is the only option, it goes to the Office of Research, and the AVP of Research has to grant you PI status. Once you have that, then you are eligible to apply for funding with either Power Foundation or Research Foundation. So that's the process I would initiate. Talk to your chair.
Right.
And it could be,
Are those the same?
it could be a formal email that everybody likes to
one is in a.
nominate you as an SPI, and then the AVP of Research will review that. And then if you have any questions, they'll.
Okay. Do we need to do a proposal first?
No. This is just to be eligible to get PI status, so you can apply.
Yeah, I mean, you want to lead into it the way you did here, talking
Right.
about your expertise and interest.
Right.
I'm sure she'd be very open to it. I know she's granted PI status or been in support of PI status for lecturers that are interested in serving
Okay.
that. She does want to be sure that you have the capability to be a PI. Yeah. But for sure, you can come to all of these.
Yeah.
I don't think you'd be eligible, though I'm not sure, for the University Grants Academy. You guys don't apply.
Ever since I've been interested in that, but honestly, that was like my first year was real busy. Learned everything.
I would consult with Gilles and just ask him, given your status, what your eligibility is for applying for internal awards, including
Yeah, 'cause I've never this person heard.
Oh, okay.
Maybe this is something else.
Hi. Good. Do you know what you want? Can I help you find what you need?
These are all for like organizing your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, you can,
Well, that's an intercept.
yeah, are you NSF?
Well, I haven't got one before, but I'd be interested.
Oh, of course not. I'm sure nobody in this room. That's fine. But if you're in the beginning stages, the one that I like looks like it may be already gone. Is the The one that looks a little like this, but I just have one. It looks like this, but I just have the one page. Here's my one photocopies. But I can, if you're on the, if you signed up on the email list, oh look, maybe it's right there. You see that one? Looks like this.
No, there wasn't.
She said, this is a really interesting project. How we should see. I don't know about programs and other
Yeah, no, I mean, it's still the same.
Yeah, actually, I'm hoping to get emails about well, you saw.
Yeah, he gave us the right. Carmina and I were.
Same exact stuff.
I'm a theoretical person. I've got the Howard Boss right now. I've got the theoretical framework.
But so that'll be out.
The other thing is like, thinking about how big
Similar.
yeah, government is not government is
But
Yes.
anyway, so this, I mean, it's a
When we go back.
And the other two groups are like staff, they have much more in my area. So I've been working with some universities there developing their understanding of programs.
Yes, absolutely.
You know, how that's a bizarre question for them, they don't anyway, but, and then, University of Arizona has he's like, yeah, we're kind of aware of that, but we don't have anyone. So that would be the first thing. I think the first one to me is immediate short term. Hi, Lisa. I'm in the humanities, so I was just sort of saying, she was like, she said something about making a smaller grant, 50,000. I'm like, okay, that's great. It's about 10 times more than anything.
Based on that,
Okay. Okay. I'll make sure before I. But I really want to do you, yeah. Yeah, I have a rough idea of big part of it. Just would be doing stuff in Vietnam. Right. I just got back. Okay.
Yeah, and if you want,
Here, grab it for you.
Yeah. So what's the matter with us completing this?
yeah, or have something that when you come to visit.
So how are you two related?
So
She said she would be willing to. The other thing I need to do is I know that she's very interested in this type of stuff. Okay, great. Let's talk about where this was an hour. I like small teams. The bigger the team, the harder it is. Thank you very much. You're welcome.
But then as things kind of click, I saw the interest in the event, so maybe that's just. Because, I know we're certainly trying the time.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe even 1 minute. Where you hear.
Well, 1 minute, 25 people, that's 25 minutes of our informational hour.
Yeah.
So maybe, yeah.
No, Vicky, okay.
Yeah, just in one sentence.
Yeah, one
Yeah.
sound. Yeah.
What do you hope to achieve from this in participating in this series?
Hello. Hello. I'm well. Thank you for coming.
I didn't do it and I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Great.
Part of our team.
So, that reminds me, I need to end the meeting. Hopefully, unfortunately,